Hi everyone, welcome to the session of our web series, Fireside Chat with Champions, in which we interview global business leaders asking them crowdsourced questions relevant to the biggest challenge we face today, COVID-19 and its impact on various aspects of business and society, and the way we can steer ourselves in current uncertainties. Today we have with us Yap Kwong Weng, Principal Advisor, AI Lab Executive Director, KPMG Singapore. Yap set up KPMG and A STAR Joint Lab, the first AI lab in Singapore, which is a strategic asset that builds and deploys technologies in data mining, predictive analytics, intelligent automation, cybersecurity, and VR technologies. Yap, a Singaporean, worked in the army for 12 years as a commando. He worked in Myanmar to head operations in the energy sector. While doing so, he also co-founded a company called Trip.me, a travel tech startup in Vietnam. This startup now operates across 100 countries and its own cybercurrency. Yap is a PhD from University of Glasgow, an alumnus of Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Stanford University, Harvard Kennedy School, University of Manchester, and University of Buffalo. Yap was honored as a young global leader by World Economic Forum and a Rotary Peace Fellow by Rotary International. Thanks, Yap, for accepting our invitation. I would request you to let our viewers know a bit more about you and your current interest and activity.
Well, thank you very much, Deepak. I think it's brilliant, to be able to come on your show and knowing some of the achievements that you have done in your company. Well, first of all, like all of you, we are all stuck in COVID-19. I come from a background where I used to work with the Singapore military and then decided to venture overseas, take a look at oil and gas, construction, emerging markets, in particular around Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, looked at the distribution systems, look at engineering products, look at supply chains, really very much a big thing today. And then, took a nudge, at entrepreneurship, focusing very much on travel, because at that point of time, travel is, within Southeast Asia is up and coming. But travel tech within that particular domain has not been really looked at yet. So we looked into it, we devised blockchain technologies, and then now we have our own cryptocurrency, which people can buy, our tokens, and then after that use that at a premium discount when they travel. For those that are staying at home, we'll pay them, to stay at home. So these are some of the ideas. Now, underneath these ideas really are hardcore data analytics, which I thought, made up of machine learning, predictive analytics, so on and so forth. So now I'm in KPMG, accounting company, but at the same time, focuses a lot on technology to reinvent themselves. And the AI lab, which we partner with research agency A STAR, does that precisely. So we have installed, several key technology projects that focus on delivering and deploying such new technology solutions to companies and also, within the firm itself. So I think that is a journey which I have tried to take, moving from emerging markets down to digital, from digital down to companies, companies down, and who knows what will happen next. I think the road is always turning and winding, and in a post-COVID environment, I believe that one of the key things is to reimagine and to take the leap.
Great, Yap, actually very well articulated, and in fact, something which you have created, which is AI Lab. I think it's nearly 1.5 years back. This is when it was created, right? You'll see that after that, it has created a domino effect. Lot of countries, right? They have also started doing that, especially when we talk about Southeast Asia and Middle East. So you will find that now AI related activities, AI incubators, AI venture labs, AI labs, you have different names, but a lot of countries are taking that model and trying to replicate in their own countries or own provinces. So that was great, and congratulations for achieving something which is very, very vital, I believe, going forward, not just for the Singapore's own economy, but also for the world, because Singapore is now becoming a crucible for deep tech. So that brings us to our question answer session. As you know, COVID is unlike anything the world has seen so far, and things will be very different post-COVID. Today we are talking about a new world post-COVID, right? A world which is talking about social distancing, a world which is completely destroying close to 40% startups and SMEs, a world which is actually ensuring that close to 150 million people would be pushed back to poverty. So all those challenges we are seeing the trauma of maybe hundreds of thousands of people being dead after once it ends. It's a challenging time. How do you see the impact of COVID and post-COVID activities on startup ecosystem in general and Singapore in particular?
That's a great question, Deepak. I think in pre-COVID situation, the Singapore startup community was already gaining quite some traction. And to my understanding, I read up a little bit about it, found out that we recently ranked, I think, number 16 in the world for startups. And that is by itself quite a huge accomplishment, because we're a small country. I mean, in the top, the usual, suspects, the Americans, the British, the Israelis, and of course, the Chinese and Australians also at the same time, the Indians also as well. So you see, the thing is that we crept up to rank 16. But quite frankly, if you look at it, startups in the pre-COVID world, it's in a very different stage. It's very traditional, as you know. So you run many startups, and then you look at funding, you look at you look at the market, you test for market demands, you test your product, you do your pre-deployment test, and then after that you think about your exit strategy. Who are you going to sell to? You're going to IPO? You're going to stay? You're going to leave? What stage you're going to break even? These are very, very essential points, which all startups, have done. And but in the post-COVID world, what's going to happen? So there are new startups that are coming up, but at the same time, I also want to say that there are limitations that have come up too. Those at the very junior stages in the startups will be affected, because why would they want to throw a stable job, if they can find a very good job and leave it for a startup? So therefore, the challenges become higher. The bar is now set higher. You move to another country, maybe it helps, and depends on which city, smart city you're going to. It depends. So your sense of adventure will increase significantly, and that's challenging, for a small country like us. But nevertheless, if you look at the domestic scene, where you have multiple networks, different types of social capital coming in, if I may, both from not just from government agencies, from scientific agencies, pulling in, regional networks, pulling in, friends like yourself, to come in, and through very remote learning methods to create something. Now, that's with the support, of course, with institutions that are willing to take the risk. So recently, to my understanding, I hear through the news that our Economic Development Board has partnered with Seed Capital, one of the subsidiaries of Enterprise Singapore, also another government agency, to dish out support funding for very niche startups that can benefit, national causes. And I think that is one step, that I think will make a difference. They they committed $285 million, which is a sizable amount, to various startups in Singapore. So I think this can give them a certain leverage point, to instill more confidence that say, we, are going to come in with you at the first step. But as to how you perform and how you adapt to the environment, gain competitive advantage, is a completely different situation altogether. You still need to look at your product. You still need to look at your competitor analysis. You still need to give your customers what they want, and even better still, faster, better, etc. So I think the ball game changes, but the principles and the values of how businesses are run remain. If you look at the long-term situation of COVID, which is, in my opinion, it's going to be around for a very long time, as many people understand. Travel will be slowed down, retail sectors affected, aviation affected. People will likely spend less in certain areas, transport, shopping, etc. But precisely because of all this, new innovations that happen within these spaces to increase efficiencies will be very, very competitive. It means you can scale up at a much faster level. So give you an example. Now, jobs will be lost around the world, hundreds of millions, definitely, right? India, the US, so on. Now, if there are multiple, think about it, if there are multiple entrepreneur startups that come together to help these particular group find jobs that they want to using AI, now that itself is an opportunity. It's an idea, but I understand there are already some startups, and I have spoken to them, that are really looking at some of these. So they have their own platform, they've reached out not just through companies by a phone call. They have looked very much at the algorithm on how behaviors change. So therefore, consumers' behavior, have been looked at. They have been crunched, and they have people predict, and the prediction actually starts now using AI. So there's a part of reimagination. There's a part where replan. Companies have to replan, and most importantly, as all of this happens, you and me will have to recover at some point. In our current stages, whatever means it may be moving from one company to another, it may be moving from one workplace to another, or it may be totally changing the profile of the work that we are doing currently. And that means changing business models. That means looking at the way how we live, work, and play. And based on that alone, I think it makes a very positive sign in terms of intellectual and economic progression. But at the same time, one would expect that jobs will be losses, lower wages expected, and also, learning systems will be initially affected, but very fast it will come up. And I've spoken to many, companies in the last few weeks. And what I found is that, automation, alertness, vigilance, including food security, health security, with some sort of predictive elements, is going to be large, be in large demand. And I think that, with all this in mind, taking the first step sometimes is the most difficult. And getting people back on their original jobs, for example, the pilots, the cabin crew that are affected from aviation around the world, getting them, it's back onto the job within a few months, it's going to be a big task. Healthcare system, helping our frontline workers, they themselves are suffering, at the same time. But of course, kudos to all the efforts they have done. But at the same time, they themselves have to recover. Come back to normal businesses. Look at the way how the systems of how they should be delivering their best for our people, and likewise for our people to deliver the best for them, as well. So I think this works in both ways. This is a cycle that comes around, and I guess as as citizens, as human beings, we are learning very much, from this unprecedented crisis. That of course, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this before. And well, many would struggle. Many companies would struggle, to accept that as early takers, we bear a certain risk. But in the long run, I think rewards go to those, that dare to take certain ventures and risk, and of course put in, their worth.
Very well articulated.
I'm sorry,
that gives a 360-degree, overview of the global ecosystem for startup as well as what's happening in Singapore. You talked about one thing which, I would like to talk a little bit more. That is the food security. If we see that most of the government post-COVID, they started seeing the challenge when the broken supply chains are there and you don't have access to food can become a real challenge for any government. So across the globe, we have seen that the focus on food security and safety has substantially increased. And Singapore has come out with their, though they came before the COVID, Vision 2030, where 30% nutrient to be grown locally by 2030. Right. So those type of initiatives are there. I would like to understand from you, because Singapore themselves, right, because of being a city state, does not have own experiences or expertise in doing agriculture. So would that mean that actually you see people from across the globe coming and doing innovative farming using maybe vertical farms, urban farms in Singapore? Do you think that's how this whole idea is, or create more farmers within from Singaporeans?
I think that's a really interesting idea. Agricultural farming. A lot depends on of course, the supply chain. I mean, overseas, around our area, Southeast Asia, agriculture is such a big thing. In Cambodia, in Laos, in Thailand, rice, palm trees, etc. So there's a lot of farming, and agriculture that's really needed. In Singapore, I don't think farming will be the key priority, but having said that, the idea and concept, of farming enterprises could be a possible cause, because I guess it's not just about farming. If you look at the whole ecosystem of a supply chain, you would need your raw materials, you would need somebody to deliver them, you would need to distribute them. And then, of course, there must be a business model on how this works, through retail. So if you look at the whole spectrum, Singapore sits in a position where, it serves as a one-stop station. It gives you good manpower, it gives you good government support, it gives you good stability to set up, your brain and your HQ, very, very carefully. Of course, you could do it in India, but then, if you have the research houses, if you have the businesses, if you have the government support, all coming in together to say, we'll make you succeed, we'll make everyone succeed, and we'll make the Singaporeans that are involved in this succeed as a company. Now, that's a very, very different story from, an entrepreneur, right? So it's a different story where you look at Shark Tank and then you say, oh, so this guy wins something, you put him in, and then after that you do your very best, But of course, if you take the example from Shark Tank, these guys come, with a lot of experience, a lot of backing, and a lot of marketing, I would say capabilities and powers behind them. So the thing now is, what is the nudge? What is the driving forces behind it? It no longer can be conventional anymore. It's no longer going to say, I'm going to fund you X amount, you come back in 3 years with this X amount, and then if it's not enough, I'll loan it to you. That's outdated. So today, different funding methods, should continue. And I think that there must be flexibility enough, not just to deliver food security, but to predict food security. Because if you can predict what's going to happen, not in a COVID environment, I mean, predict, when I say predict the numbers of, in which particular segment group, this is going to increase by how many %. It will give you a much better understanding of how much you should produce and reproduce. I like to bring you to a certain point about learning abilities. You know, people always say, you know, we have to, as entrepreneurs, you learn, and then after that you use experience. But now I say, maybe you should learn how to unlearn the past, and that by itself could be, you know, a challenge by itself, because you always believe that this is the way to do it. But now I ask you to unlearn, and then I also ask you to relearn. And now, so that's another stage altogether. You unlearn first, and then you relearn. So I think that is something that we're all trying to grapple with. And quite frankly, for big companies, the learning curve might be much higher. Although the capacity to develop the learning curve might be there, the level of acceptance and also, you know, the stages to push it out might be very different. So operating in high performance small teams now might be critical for countries that want to have the competitive advantage.
I fully agree with what you said, because the countries were banking on, like, you know, we give a good life, we give you a work-life balance, please come and set up a startup here. Now, actually, most of the people would be working virtually. So all that advantages, right, of a clean environment, nice gardens, right, suddenly become a little bit more urgent than what it was. So I fully agree with that. So yeah, actually, like from startup, let's move a little bit further. Like, let's understand a little bit what's happening in the economy. Initially, you have talked a little bit about what are the sectors which, as you rightly mentioned, that aviation or tourism could be a little bit of challenge. But the digital economy is just picking up every day, right? We are seeing Zoom, right? Suddenly, which was a laggard and coming out and now becoming a market dominant factors. Suddenly, you find that actually a lot of the activities which we used to do personally, right? Suddenly, you are having far more sales happening through, like, you know, e-commerce grocery, rather than actually you going to the shop and buying it. So we have seen that the biggest factor for a digital transformation is not a CEO or CIO, but COVID, right? So a lot of transformation to digital is going to happen. According to your understanding, how do you see, like, you know, the digital transformation, digital industry picking up at the global level as well as at the Singapore, where actually which has been a leader in helping the companies who work in digital transformation area, including the lab which you are having. It's talk about futuristic digital technology.
Yeah. Great, Deepak, that's a great question. Is digital transformation going to accelerate or going to decelerate? Well, I think known to everybody, and my opinion, it's going to move doubly, triply fast. It's going to accelerate at a very, very fast pace. Not because people like it, but because, you know, it's a reality of life. What concerns me is the abilities of people accepting it, and also looking at some of the social costs that are involved. So, you know, for us, we may accept it at a much faster pace, but there will be a group of people that may take a longer time, but don't have very much choice. So maybe they are the more senior group of people, past generation, you know, older. They have a problem, you know, accepting. So we must look at the space also on wider acceptance, social acceptance, and also second is to look at, you know, how big tech companies would regulate themselves as well. Because if you look at, you know, some of the biggest stock exchange today, all the biggest companies are the big tech companies, and they have to take a certain level of leadership. And if I say leadership, I mean, you know, technology leadership, I mean ethical leadership, I mean moral leadership. And I think this all combines together. So pre-COVID, it was, these issues were never so, you know, underscored so obviously. But today, in the COVID world, we see all these issues coming up much stronger. You know, to be frank with you, the protests are not happening simply because there were no protests before. The protests were happening, you know, because there were underlying problems all along. But because people are now, you know, not just at home, but people are very much more focused on all these issues, it touches their heart in many ways. The moral aspects of it, come out, not just in the US, but also some parts of Asia, and a lot of fundamental issues arise. This has become a global trend that humans either get divided or humans get united. And I don't wish to make it so simple, as in there's two parts of things, but the reality, I think, is, it is inevitable that when a crisis hits, there needs to be a certain level of incubation to accept the crisis, and then, to unite, to develop something so that everybody recovers. And as much as I think, that the world will recover at very different levels, the recovery has been encouraging. I mean, whether we like it or not, we've seen the best of humanity come out, among the world, from groups that we have never seen before. We have seen also, the not so good parts of humanity, that has come out. People that exploit the situation, from different parts of the world. And because the world is so connected today, well, one thing moves, another gets affected. And this interconnectedness somewhat has struck many people. So from Silicon Valley to San Francisco to Beijing to Shanghai to Hangzhou, these smart city centers, or these centers where you see lots of venture capital entrepreneurs, the smarts of the world, are all thinking about reinventing themselves as we speak. Every single one of them, So the question is, what bets are they going to place? Are they going to place on something that is already developed? They're going to go into something that suits the COVID situation? Or, like yourself, are you going to take a chance, in maybe more emerging markets? So I guess, these are all factors, to be considered. And come to think about it, if I were going to be, I rewind, I go back to, times where maybe I'm early 20s, right? Early 20s, you finish school, and then you just come out of school, and then you have a good degree, and then maybe you study a little bit of AI, data analytics class, and then you say, I don't know whether or not. My parents think I should definitely get into an engineering or IT job, but I think no, maybe I do something different. But if I don't work in a big company today and get the big name, if I go into do all these jobs, actually there's higher risk for me, because I don't know whether the company will survive in 1 year. Maybe they will close down in 6 months. I don't know. Even big companies close down. They get lower valuation these days. So how is that going to work? The consideration totally changes, as opposed to what we had a few months ago. Within a span of 6 months, the considerations has changed. So our education system, technologies in our education system, the way of learning, and I mentioned earlier on, the way of relearning, comes into the picture today, has hit us really hard. And, it is one way to say, oh, let's relearn, but to demonstrate it and to deploy, the technologies that come out from it is a totally different proposition. You are a tech entrepreneur, you understand, what I'm saying. You can't move on one direction and then after that calibrate and say, oh no, we're going to deploy it in another way. That's not going to happen. Yeah, it will take you months and years, to put something out into the market. So the only thing that I think is that the big companies they make adjustments, they make tweaks, has a much higher chance as opposed to a company that hasn't started and are waiting to get funded today. That is precisely the point why we must look at these companies, and we mustn't, or rather I would say, we must always provide hope, for our young entrepreneurs, so that they in turn can provide hope, for our future generations. Yeah.
Great answer. And Yap, actually, I also strongly agree with you that as a society, as a policymaker, regulation, we will have more responsibilities, because we don't want to live in a world where actually dominated by monopolies. Post-COVID, you'll see that people with more bigger lungs have more chances to survive. So suddenly you'll find that maybe a company which is just in social media might be also selling you grocery. So that is going to create monopolies of the size which we have not seen. And monopolies are it's well proven theory that when monopolies increase, overall well-being of the people decreases, right? So that's what we have to be careful about, as you rightly said, about moral, ethical way of doing things. If company they themselves don't regulate themselves, right, fairly, then you'll have to find the society and the governments on the regulators to regulate it, because that's become very, very critical for the society's well-being. Now that brings us to the last section of our discussion. Here we are looking based on your experience, your expertise, that we are pretty sure that COVID is going to end someday, right? It could be 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, right? People can have different views on that. But being a resilient race, which is human race, right? It is going to end. Now, the very critical thing is that whenever it is going to end, the bounce back is going to happen. And I need our advice based on the type of work we have done, that how startups should be acting, what they should be doing today, what they should be careful about, so that they are able in future to work well and be successful.
Well, Deepak, thank you. Actually, there are many other more successful startup, people around. But what I can say is just based on my personal experiences, experiences where, as a matter of resilience, when you get knocked down, you want to come up faster, and it is precisely this determination that you have that can help you to success, in whichever area that you move in. This is a very broad principle, but the idea remains the same to every startup entrepreneur. Because if you go in with the mindset, I know I'm going to get into difficulty, but I so choose to want to get into difficulty, and I will become stronger. Whether the result is good, no good, I learn from it, I pick it up, and I go. I find the best way, I make best use of my resources and the resources that I can mobilize. Now, if you have that mindset, and then you start off with it, you break it down into many different smaller teams, and then something right will happen along the way. But if you don't decide to go along with it, then it's better to work in another company, another sector. Because indeed, I must tell you, the risks will be higher if you venture into a startup in a post-COVID world, unless, it is backed up, supported, more clearly. But for example, give Singapore an example. Our startup entrepreneurs, 50% or more than 50%, half of them, have a master's degree. They are largely males. So we do need more, female startup founders. And I've seen the figures. Yeah, it's true. So we do need more female startup founders, and I think they'll be extremely successful in what they do. I've seen a lot of them. They're great, And really, I think now is the time where you see, Singapore mobilizing, galvanizing towards not just a startup community, but as a more connected society. Singapore is a multiracial society. It's already very connected, So historically, we've proved it. But the way ahead really is to be a connected and united society. And regardless of all the networks that you may be in a startup, you may be, in a government sector, you may be in the private sector. But if you have that level of communication and connectedness, small groups, large groups, small nodes, as they call it, high performance groups, sometimes the level of spirit, the level of social space, will enable you, to go a lot further. People always say it's it's not a matter of how many companies you meet these days. It's not a matter of how many people you meet these days. It's actually how connected you are, and whether or not you can convert those connections into something that is fruitful for society and consumers to use. So that is what I would tell our young aspiring startups. I would say expect a big fight. Don't lose faith, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to be even more difficult. If you have any advice that you need further, go to Deepak. Read more Deepak Chopra also. And quite frankly, the world is your oyster.
Very well said. Very well said. In fact, I would like to summarize 3 very important points which you said. One is that actually initially you talked about unlearning is very important for everyone, including the startup founders. That's very critical. Be very careful about the resources, how you use those resources. And third, that you have to give a fight, right? And anything which doesn't kill you, make you stronger. So very, very awesome advice from you, Yap. And I'm pretty sure that I've learned a lot from the discussion, and all the audience would love it, and they would take home a lot of insights from the discussion we had today. Thanks for your time, Yap. It was pleasure talking to you, and look forward to collaborate with you in future and work for betterment of society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Thank you. And I wish you all the very best.